And this is the second part: key factors, financial risk tolerance, and risk perception. We've been talking or listening to our presenters and to our neighbors about risk the whole morning. Yeah? The only thing what we didn't do is, and I would like to invite you now to do that for a few seconds, to answer the question, what is risk for you? Please write down your definition of risk. Okay, thank you. If you want, you can have a look at your neighbor's definition. Okay, I guess you discovered that there are several definitions on the table. If you would move in the room, you would discover there are more or less 50 different definitions in the room. And a controller of a university in Germany, he was struggling with this term as well, and he started in 2003 a semantic analyzing process, and he analyzes how many definitions and which definitions are around when it comes to the term risk. And he found more than 300. And this is when we come back to the idea of know your client. An invitation to you. Do you really know the definition for risk of your client already? I don't think so. I don't think so. And maybe if you think you know it, take a chance, let the surprise arrive, and ask your client. If it is the same as you thought, it's fine. But in this moment, your client understands that he has a definition of risk, and maybe this definition fits for investments, but maybe it doesn't. And this is what the accountant was drawing as a consequence. He said, there's no right or wrong definition. We have different definitions of risk, obviously. And when we start to advise or to take a decision in the family, in the business, group, team, CEOs, whoever, we need to make sure to know our definitions, to make sure whether they are similar or the same, and whether they fit to the decision that we want to take. So what he brought up, I will show you in the slide after the next slide. This is what people said in other audiences. Yeah. Maybe you find a definition that is similar to yours. Maybe you see one that is better, or you like more. You can take it. Maybe there's a surprise. And this is a selection. Yeah? And it's so wonderful to see when we ask our clients or ourselves. Risk becomes a very interesting concept. Yeah? Nothing that is so neutral or just numbers-based and so on. We can talk with our clients about it. And it takes not long, but it gives you a huge insight, whether your client is close to your definition, not close to your definition, and whether it fits. And this guy brought up several patterns, and I will show you two patterns that I observe often when I'm working with clients as a coach. And there is no correct definition, of course, but there are patterns. So the first pattern that he is describing is there are people who have one-sided definitions of risk, loss aversion. And there are others who have a two-sided definition of risk. Yeah, gains and losses. So, which is the right one? Yeah, which fits best? We have an opinion, I think. Maybe our clients don't know. And I can bet, I come back to the ratio, intuition and emotion. If you are talking with your clients about risk and you bring in your definitions and your papers and your information, and you don't know the definition of your client, and when it is different, if the client has a different definition, and you don't bring it in a conscious conversation, he or she will say yes, 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 while he is with you in the room. And when he goes out, unconsciously, he will work with his own decision afterwards. And this brings something sometimes that we call irrational. I don't think it's irrational, it's natural. Yeah? And if we talk about it, we can see whether it fits or not. And one idea is, okay, if somebody has a one-sided definition of risk, maybe he needs a little bit coaching, not information, not this is right or wrong, but what does it mean? Where does it come from? When you think of investments, how does that fit? This is not an advising process. This is a little bit of coaching in this moment, and it helps the client himself or herself maybe to recreate a little bit, maybe to open up for another aspect of a definition of risk that is two-sided. Obviously, the two-sided gain and loss is more closer to an investment decision, so we could take it. The second one is maybe also very interesting. The pattern goes like this. There is a term. You need to ask, where does this word come from, risk? It comes either from risk. This is a Greek term, and it means fate from God. I'm standing here, and anybody does anything with me or for me, and I take it or leave it. I take it when it comes good. I hope I can avoid it when it comes bad, but maybe I can't, because it's closed and illiquid suddenly. So God could be a synonym for Woodford, in a way. Yeah? Maybe he thought he is God, in a way, and we thought, the audience, the people who bought his funds, thought a little bit. Yes, and we gave up control, we give up control, and then we say, okay, I hope it will turn out good. So this might be a starting point for conversation. And the other is the opposite, risicare, from a Latin origin. And this means circuit and controllable. I can do something about it. Very risk-tolerant people, of course, think they can trade, they can time, and so on. So in this case, I would say both need coaching when they are extremely in these patterns. So, but the most important is know your client, ask him or her, and understand him a little bit better. Don't say this is right or wrong. Ask and help him to compare and to find out what is the best definition for him or her for the next step in the decision-making process. Okay, and what is an appropriate definition for investing, for risk tolerance? That's the next step. When we know about risk and we talk about risk in investment decision-making, the question is, what is risk tolerance? And now there is a definition that comes from the industry. It's an ISO definition, Personal Financial Planning Standards. Maybe you know it from your work. Financial risk tolerance is the extent to which a person accepts negative consequences, losses, in order to achieve a positive result, profits. Yeah. So this is reasonable. This fits. But if your client has a one-sided definition and you only bring that in the room, that won't work out when you are not talking to him or her. Okay? So it needs a little bit development with some clients to this point. So on the one side now we have risk tolerance, and we can measure it. We can come back to that later on. But almost as important as risk tolerance is risk perception. People
situations when they read something in the papers, or they have been talking to a colleague or a friend and want to change their decision that they took a half a year ago, 1 year ago, 3 months ago, 2 days ago, because not that there is, as we all know, risk tolerance is a relative, stable personal trait, but because of their risk perception that changed. And this is what we find. We have several studies, meanwhile, worldwide, that risk tolerance is a relatively stable aspect to our personality, but risk perception changes. And obviously, MSCI work, obviously going up and down. And this is risk tolerance measured in the same time frame. So you see, risk tolerance change. So what happens when a client in their office and who want to change their portfolio? It's not because their risk tolerance suddenly is different. It's because something in the news changed their risk tolerance. At the end of 1999 and 2000, in Germany, suddenly more and more people were buying shares. They saw the DAX going up and up and up and up. And suddenly in our big letter newspaper, somebody was talking about stock shares and everybody was willing to do. Not everybody bought shares, thankfully, but a lot of people who were not prepared to do. And at the moment, we have a similar situation. In Germany, a lot of advisors and product distributors offer clients because of the low interest rates. And this is not, it's not rational. It's a sales part. Yeah? And now we see that people prepared. Maybe their risk tolerance is high enough. That's not the question, but they're not prepared enough. They are only triggered by the guys who are talking about you need something that has more performance than your saving bank's account. Yes, so things happen when we don't differentiate between both risk tolerance and risk perception. Because if you decide for something for the long run, of course, your risk tolerance is key, not the risk perception today, and not what happens in China with Trump, with Brexit. Yes, a little bit, I know, Martin. Yeah, we can't put that aside completely, but normally it's not the point for your client. So, and this is what clients can take, they understand it, and I invite clients when I talk to them, please don't go to your advisor and want to change something because you read something in the newspapers. Understand and check yourself whether this is a changed perception of risk or whether this is really something that happened in your life, where you say my risk capacity or other reasons why I want to change my portfolio. And when we not take into account risk tolerance and risk perception, this happens. People and advisors focus on investments in the whole conversation and a little bit on risk tolerance, maybe at the end of the conversation. In Germany, it's a sheet of paper, and then the client says, oh, where shall I make my cross to get what you recommended me? I know that you are totally differently working. I was talking to colleagues here in the room, and I know some of you are working with Phenometrica, maybe you are working with different tools. But obviously, this is not know your client. This is knowing his wealth, his money, his cash, or whatever he brings to you. But knowing your client and knowing himself is more on the left side in the green area, and to bring a better fundament to the client for his decision-making process, I think there is a huge benefit
And I don't do the exercise with you in the paperwork now. I give you just an idea. I think we are all together to say, if you give them opportunity to get to know their financial risk tolerance, then the person and the individual is in the center of the decision-making process. And this is motivating for clients. They like that. They like being partner in the process. And the difference to risk perception is easy to understand, so they feel comfortable and they feel competent when you help them to understand these parts of the decision-making process. Okay, so to summarize, I need my paper. First thing that we were talking about is, thank you for reminding me, intuition, ratio, and emotions as 3 parts of a decision-making process that needs to be managed, to be included, to be managed. Emotions need to be managed in the way that we reduce emotions. Talking about risk can be a normal thing if you take the resources of your clients and give them comfort talking about it. It doesn't mean that you be happy to talk about risk, of course, but to feel, neutral, maybe, creative, maybe. And the rational part needs good information, few information, and this is really tricky. Yeah? Unfortunately, I have to leave after my talk, so I won't be able to listen to the last part, but I had the chance to listen to the video of Chris, and yesterday we were together as well. So the report for the client should address that, should include information, but not too much information, should include the right information that gives the client the opportunity to understand the report intuitively. Because the client, if he only understands the report when he is studying economics, then why does he need you? Yeah? So this is a challenge, obviously. So intuition, emotions, and ratio. We mentioned that risk tolerance, and risk perception are parts of the decision-making process, and questioning your client about risk tolerance, and risk perception, and talking about that helps the client and his cognitive map to be enriched for the steps that he has to take. And when you measure risk tolerance, the question is, how do we measure risk tolerance? Is it difficult? Do you need 25 questions? We will see. Maybe ask your clients just one question. You have this question on your paper, and I ask you to answer that for yourself. What is my risk tolerance? Please, this is the last question for you to answer for yourself. Between 0 and 10, how risk tolerant are you when it comes to financial decision making? Okay. You see, intuitively working means speedy up, because you don't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of time to answer this question. And the wonderful thing is that good research tells us this question is very reliable. You can rely on your answer and on the answer of your clients. So before we come to your clients, I would like to ask you in the room, and raise your hands, please, when I speak up the number. Who has crossed 0? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So, when you look around, what did you see? What is the bias in the room? High or low risk tolerance? High, of course. Yeah, you mentioned that this morning. Yeah, and Baha did it. Yes, of course. It's a self-selection in the industry. You like investments. Yeah, you like this fever of Woodford and others. Yeah, or maybe dimensional with a scientific background and on that kind of stuff. Yeah, obviously our clients are different. Yeah, they are in the middle. Or we know from tests. We know most of our clients will say 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And only very few 0 and 8 and 1, and also very few 8, 9, and 10. That means you always have the challenge when you talk to your clients that you are thinking about risk, about investments. Your experience is so different, so different. Sometimes I think we can't imagine how different it is. Yeah? So it needs to change the perspective, to listen very actively to our clients. So, but what I wanted to say is, this is a good question. So at the end, we know the risk tolerance of our clients. The challenge is, what does it mean when somebody says 3.5 or 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever? So we need a translation from this number to the portfolio. And this can be done by different processes, by different methodologies. As I mentioned before, I found Phenometrica 10 years, or 12 years, 14 years before, I don't know. And I found this is a good process. Maybe you have other processes to do. We will need your competencies at this point in the exercise that we now are facing and heading to. So by the way, who is using Phenometrica or knowing Phenometrica in the room? You, a few, okay. Most of you are not, no problem. There are different ways to work through the process, but what we need and what I invite you to do from today on is, with whatever you're working, take your client with you and not saying, okay, this is your risk tolerance and I recommend you a portfolio 50-50, 30-60 or whatever, because I translate it. This is a break in the process. Your client won't feel linked to this solution good enough. And when it comes to crisis, to volatile markets, the client needs this intuitive link to his portfolio. And as I mentioned, what I found very interesting was that Phenometrica found an idea to take the answers of the client and look through the answers in portfolios and tell the client, well, this answer you can find in this portfolio, this answer will be addressed in this portfolio, and then you can bring the client to a state of decision-making that he understands what is the conflict, what is the opportunity, what he needs to find a compromise, just for his personal point of view. And then you bring in risk capacity and risk needed. But we know from a lot of years working with Phenometrica does only when you take the questionnaire and talk about the results, you find contradictions in clients. Yeah, we are not in one row. We say we want to have 20% loss most of the time, not more, and we want to have 3 times the market shares with in relation to interest rates. Yeah, we know that hasn't been realistic. Do you know? By the way, this is a trick, what I'm saying, because most of my clients, not you in the room, are advisors and portfolio managers. And when I give them Phenometrica, I see that they are very risk-friendly. And the answer to one question that asks you, what is your ratio? What do you want to have when you take risk? They say, I want to have 3 times or 3.5 times interest rates, bank deposits. And they said that 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and yesterday. And the interesting thing is, for me, I can take the papers of Phenometrica and show them this hasn't been realistic at any point in time in the last 50 years. And this is new for my clients, for advisors and portfolio managers. So what we can see is that we have a very high expectation that is never met, never pointed, never given by the market in the long run. Yes, there are times when you get 3 times, 4 times, or even more. Yeah? But not when you invest more than 10, 20, or 30 years. And when I'm an advisor and don't have this insight, how can I advise people? Yeah, so it's very interesting also for us as professionals, thinking we know everything about the markets, to understand where we have blind spots. Okay, but the question is, what does it mean for you? And this is a conversation that people like very much. I do it myself when I'm working as a coach. I'm training and supervising advisors using Phenometrica, of course, but it's the process that helps, what I wanted to mention. Measuring risk tolerance on a sound and broad basis means going further, objective, reliable, and valid, and give the client orientation and feeling safe by going through this process. And this means manage his emotions in this very moment and for the next years. So we reduce negative surprises by this process. So that means the ratio, the conscious mind, and the intuition of the client can work together as a team, wonderful, and emotions keep calm. Using language, images, and stories from everyday life, easily comprehensible for everyone. That's obvious. If your clients don't understand what they are asked to answer, it's a difficult thing. And what I like very, very much is that people start to think about risk, about themselves. They create more cognitive landscape in their brain about the topics we like to talk about. He passes on the right information and he becomes active, eye high, a partner, and assumes responsibility. He takes the responsibility that he needs to take in this game. And this is a wonderful experience for clients, that they don't feel they are not knowing enough, not experienced enough. They don't need a lot of experience. They don't need a lot of knowledge about the markets. That's your part. But they need the knowledge about themselves and the link to the markets. So the last phase will be an exercise. Are you ready for it? Then find 2 partners to talk to. So these 3 persons will be an advisor, a client, and an observer. The advisor gets some questions. What is important for you when you are making financial decisions? What is risk? How risk tolerant are you? What does this mean for you, the risk tolerance? You get the scale. And the observer has the chance to observe for a moment. When you listen to this conversation, where is rational thinking addressed? When is intuition addressed? And when there are emotions in the room? And you can have a look, how are these criteria used in an advising interview? And how does the advisor support an ideal decision of the customer? So for this exercise and for this experiment, we need, of course, also an idea of linking risk tolerance of the client in the room, especially to a suitable asset allocation for the client. And Phenometrica uses a comfort zone picture that I like, and I like to give it to you as an opportunity for today. So you see, red is the zone where the client shouldn't be at the end. Green is the comfort zone where the client feels neutral and free and anxious without fear. And 0 to 100 means, in this case, the percentage of shares, defensive and growth assets, 0 to 100%. Yeah, it's just an asset allocation. It's not products. It's not bits and pieces. It's just when somebody says, "I'm risk tolerant 6 or 7 or 5," how is the asset allocation that normally fits to this person well? And you need anything, maybe from your background, you can bring it in, or you can use the scale for the little conversation that you are. So, the cases. Okay, everybody has the sheet of papers just for one moment. Just one moment before you start. The client has his information, advisor has the questions. And now I'd like to invite you to start. Everybody has what he needs to have? Okay. So the clients can read their profile and the answers that you can use for the conversation with your advisor. The advisor has the questions and the observer is invited just to sit and listen and write down what you observe. You have 5 minutes for the conversation from now. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the chance and talking to each other. Okay, now we need the observers. Who was the observer here? She? Okay, super. Who was your observer? Okay. Please give us a short idea. What did you observe in regard to ratio, intuition, and emotions? What did you see? What did you observe? What happened in the conversations that you had the chance to observe? Maybe you can start?
I think the financial decisions conversation started with the intention to be rational, but the description of risk turned into more emotional.
Okay.
Sort of description.
Did you get it? Yeah. It started rational, but it turned into more emotional when it came to the definition of risk. Thank you.
The risk definition was one-sided as well, which suggests it's more emotional. It's usually more loss-averse person than the risk profile suggests.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe up here, the lady.
I actually thought most of the conversation was based around the intuition, really. And like gut feelings about how to feel your equities fell. So yeah, I'd say maybe intuition, maybe only a little bit of emotions and a little bit of passion as well.
Good. Thank you. Here on this desk.
Yeah, so I felt that similarly early on it's guided by intuition because the client sort of knew how they felt about stuff, and then kind of the questions started off asking for sort of rational answers, and then looked for the emotion behind it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super. Yeah.
So we're in it too.
Cool. What was your observation about?
Basically, we saw quite a bit of kind of factual, rational thought here, which I expect, with little intuition and no emotion at all because it's blocked. And quite a bit of intuition from the other gentleman in the red jersey here, with a bit of emotion thrown in, so not quite blocked. Yeah, it was quite interesting trying to pick out this.
By the way, was it the first time for the observers that you focused on these 3 parts of decision-making process, of conversation? Or did you did this before or regularly? No. Okay. Thank you. Here?
Again, huge focus on rationale behind it. absolutely no emotion whatsoever, and in fact, I think
Coldfish.
and the poor advisor was trying to explain the difference between what he was trying to achieve and the reality of the risk profile that was behind it. So, I think a very heavy bias all the way through.
Okay. This desk.
I think Steve had diagnosed himself before he came for this appointment. So I think intuition would be the largest component. With an element of emotions, John, would you say when he was talking about the 2008 crash and his portfolio going down? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. The advisors. The question that I gave you, you weren't allowed to make your own process, so you were forced to ask these questions. Although, was it an interesting experience? What did you experience for yourself as an advisor? Maybe you can give some feedback to that.
Well, when we do it in real life with the clients, there are psychometric questions which derives their attitude. Now, the risk tolerance is mostly based on cash flow and their ability to lose permanent total capital. Now, that is a different way of looking at it. Now, the systems that we use do it like analytics, right? So, it's not quite the same that what the FCA requires.
The FCA requires. I think they don't know that they require that. That's an opinion. Okay, the advisors on this desk, yeah?
It took me about 20 years. Quite frightening. That was really frightening.
Frightening?
Yeah.
Why?
It's just such a long time ago. And I didn't even get the sale, so it's a bit like the old days, really. No, it was an interesting experience. I think, if you deviate away and interpret the questions and ask open questions, then you do get, hopefully, more
Reflection on the answers it was meant.
And I think this observation or this experience that you describe is something that, from my knowledge, from my clients, advisors who start to do something new, everybody feels a bit insecure at the beginning, uncomfortable, because you're so, used to certain questions that you normally use, or the FSA is asking you to ask. But so when you change the process and focus a little bit more on emotions and intuition of your client, or when you ask an open question and you don't know what your client might answer, and this answer might be uncomfortable for you, and this is a wonderful learning process for both sides. And this is what I think gives you the opportunity to know your client far more better. But it needs for you to take a little risk, even when you are an experienced advisor. Yes, we as coaches, we're always taking risks by asking questions, keeping quiet and listening to what the client is telling us. And advisors are normally used to ask close questions. How much money, how long, And the answers are seldom a surprise. Maybe the amount of money is a surprise, yes, but it's not a real surprise. But when you open up and ask open questions where you don't know the answer and you feel the answer is a bit difficult for you, for your process, but this is a chance for you to connect on a deeper level to your client, and this is what is the fundament for crisis. So you can start now, tomorrow, to change your communication with the clients and prepare for crises that will come. Because when the crisis has arrived, it's not the time to change the communication and to deepen the relationship to your client. It's too late. But now we can do that. I'm really happy that you were so open and willing to go all these steps with me. Knowledge is a construction. Knowledge that has an impact cannot be transferred. It must be recreated in the brain of every human being. Ideal decision. Know your personal attitude towards risk. Invest with your comfort zone, neutral, stress-free. Consider the role of perception. And the task of decision maker is absorb suitable information or give suitable information, regulate emotions, and include intuition. And now something very important comes at the end. Then make a deferred intuitive decision. Not your instinct is what we need. We need a deferred intuitive decision because your unconscious should have a little pause and recreate and process all what you've heard or got. And after this pause, that's what brain science actually says. This is the best decision that we can take. The main task of an advisor is to enable his client to make the best possible decision himself. And this is the postponed intuitive decision, and it's not on my fundament, it's the brain research of Professor Roth in Germany, in Bremen. Unfortunately, he has written an article in a book that is German, but I think you have all what you need at the moment from the presentation. I wanted to give you this idea. Leave your client in a little pause, maybe you to the next conversation, maybe you give him a tea or a coffee, and the unconscious of the client is working for him and for you perfectly. Development from advisor, I hope I gave you a little flavor what it means to develop from a finance specialist, for who sometimes almost decides for the customer, to a communication specialist who supports the customer in making a good decision for himself, maybe like a financial coach. And I say thank you very much and have a good time. Yeah.